The town of Maple Hollow was the kind of place where gossip ran faster than the river in spring, and silence clung to old houses like ivy. At the far edge of that town, beyond the last bus stop and the sagging fences, stood a forgotten house, gray, creaking, and almost swallowed by the woods. No one wanted to live there. Locals said it was haunted. Children dared each other to run up to its porch at night and touch the door. Yet one cold November morning, a woman arrived with nothing but 2 suitcases, a photo frame, and a heart that had already lost too much. Her name was Margaret Holloway, though most people just called her the widow. She wasn't old, maybe 55, but life had carved quiet lines across her face. Her husband, Charles, had been gone for 2 years, and since his death, the house they'd shared had become a museum of grief. Every object was a memory. Every wall, a wound. So, when the old, Hawthorne house went up for sale at a price no one dared to touch, Margaret sold everything and moved in. The realtor had looked at her like she was insane. "Mrs. Holloway, that house has history," he'd warned, his voice dropping to a whisper. "So do I," she'd replied softly. The day she arrived, the wind was sharp, the trees skeletal. The house groaned as if reluctant to accept her. She cleaned for hours, sweeping away cobwebs, whispering to herself that dust couldn't haunt her more than memories did. As night fell, she made tea, sat on the floor with her photo of Charles, and said, "We're here, love. Just you and me again." Outside, the forest stirred. Somewhere far off, a sound drifted through the cold, a long, mournful cry, halfway between a wail and a song. It was unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. And yet, it made her heart ache as if it knew her pain. Margaret froze. The sound came again, soft, drawn out, almost pleading. She set down her tea and went to the window. The darkness beyond the trees was thick, but something shimmered, a faint, silvery movement. Then, silence. That night she hardly slept. The next morning, she walked into the small town center. Conversations stopped when she entered the diner. Whispers followed her, "She bought the haunted place, crazy widow, won't last a week." But Margaret wasn't there for friendship, she just wanted groceries. She smiled politely, ordered coffee, and asked, "Does anyone know what kind of animals live near the forest edge?" The waitress hesitated. "Mostly foxes, and sometimes things we don't name." It wasn't the answer she expected, but it didn't scare her. Death had already visited her once. What could be worse? Days turned into weeks. Margaret repaired the broken porch, painted the shutters blue, and planted daffodils by the front steps. The house began to breathe again. Yet every night, always around midnight, she heard that sound. Long, low, unmistakably sorrowful. It didn't feel evil. It felt lonely. So, one night, she decided to follow it. Bundled in a thick coat, flashlight trembling in her hand, she stepped into the woods. The air was cold enough to bite, and her boots sank into the damp earth. The sound came again, leading her deeper, past fallen logs and whispering leaves. Then she saw it, a small shape near the creek, caught in the beam of her light. At first, she thought it was a dog. Then, as it lifted its head, she realized it was a wolf, a young one, thin and trembling, its leg caught in an old rusted trap. The metal had bitten into its flesh. Her breath caught. The wolf's eyes met hers, wild, terrified, yet glimmering with pain that mirrored her own. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered. "Who did this to you?" The animal whimpered, trying to pull free. She knelt, careful, slow. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "I know what it's like to be trapped." It took an hour. She used a wrench from her coat pocket. She'd brought it for courage, not knowing she'd need it. The trap finally loosened, snapping open with a metallic cry. The wolf bolted, then stopped, looked back at her once, eyes glowing like liquid amber, before vanishing into the trees. Margaret fell to her knees, shaking. And then, from the darkness, came that same sound, but this time it wasn't sorrowful. It was a soft, haunting howl that rose and fell like a hymn. It filled the forest, echoing through her chest until tears spilled down her face. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. In the days that followed, something changed. The nights felt lighter. The forest didn't seem so menacing anymore. Margaret began walking to the creek every morning, leaving bits of food, not out of fear, but gratitude. The wolf never approached, but she often saw fresh paw prints near the water. Spring came. The house that once looked haunted now smelled of lilacs and paint. Birds nested under the eaves. Neighbors began to notice. One afternoon, a little boy wandered up her path. "Ma'am," he asked shyly, "is it true you live where the ghost cries at night?" Margaret smiled. "I think it's not a ghost," she said. "I think it's something that was hurt, and just needed to be heard." The boy grinned and ran off, shouting, "See, I told you she's not crazy." For the first time in years, Margaret laughed. Then, one stormy night, the howling returned, louder, frantic. It wasn't the haunting melody she'd grown used to. It was a cry for help. Without hesitation, she grabbed her coat and flashlight and ran into the woods. Rain lashed at her face, branches clawed at her arms. The sound drew her toward the creek, and what she saw stopped her cold. A small den had flooded. Inside, 3 tiny wolf pups huddled together, whimpering as water rose around them. Nearby, the same wolf, the one she had freed months ago, was trapped under a fallen branch, struggling weakly. Margaret didn't think. She plunged into the icy water, pushing with all her strength to move the branch. "Come on," she gasped, "you survived once, you'll survive again." Her muscles screamed, but finally the wood shifted, and the wolf stumbled free. It didn't run this time. It turned toward her, eyes locked on hers, then limped to the den, nudging each pup out one by one. Margaret helped scoop the last one into her coat. The wolf pressed its wet nose against her hand. For a heartbeat, woman and beast simply stood there, 2 souls who had both lost too much and still chose to fight. When she got back to the house, drenched and trembling, she set the pups by the fire and wrapped them in towels. The mother wolf stayed at the door, watching silently. After a while, she turned and disappeared into the rain. Margaret whispered, "You're welcome, my friend." The next morning, she woke to find muddy paw prints on her porch, big ones, small ones, and beside them, a piece of wild thyme. She didn't know if wolves left gifts, but she took it as one. She placed it by her husband's photo and said, "Charles, I think I made a new family." Word spread through Maple Hollow. People who had avoided her now came by with pies and kind words. Children brought flowers. One local reporter even wrote, "Widow saves wolves, teaches town about compassion." But for Margaret, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound she heard each night, no longer a cry of sorrow, but a song of gratitude echoing through the valley. A sound that made her believe, for the first time since her husband's passing, that love never truly dies, it just changes shape. Months later, a ranger knocked on her door. "Ma'am," he said, "we've been tracking a small pack near your woods. They seem to stay close to your property, but they don't bother anyone. It's strange. It's like they're guarding something." Margaret smiled gently. "Maybe they are." Winter came again. Snow blanketed the fields, and the house glowed warm with firelight. Margaret sat by the window, sipping tea, watching the world turn silver. Somewhere in the distance, a familiar howl rose into the air, strong, full, alive. It didn't sound lonely anymore. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. And for a moment, just a moment, she swore she could hear another voice within it. Her husband's laughter, woven into the wind. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were no longer heavy with grief. They shimmered with peace. That sound, that unforgettable sound, would stay with her forever. Not because it was eerie or strange, but because it reminded her that healing often begins where no one else dares to go. And in the heart of that forgotten house, surrounded by forest and moonlight, a widow found something far greater than fear. She found life again. Moral message. Sometimes, the places everyone avoids are where miracles choose to happen. And sometimes, the sounds that haunt us the most are not cries of ghosts, but echoes of compassion waiting to be heard.